Good evening, everyone. This is the monthly meeting for New York, sponsored by ICSA, the International Cultic Studies Association. So welcome, and this is one in our series of what we're calling conversations, where specialists in different areas come and speak with this group. And it's being videoed, but only their speaking part will be videoed. So we just ask that while they're speaking, you don't ask questions or intervene at all. When they're done, the camera will go off, and then questions will be, you can ask questions. So if you have any thoughts or questions, just if you would please write them down during the program. And it'll be approximately a half an hour, maybe a little longer than that. So tonight, just a reminder that this organization sponsors this monthly meeting for people affected by the cult phenomenon. It can be families, those who have been involved as so-called members, and we're here every Friday, last Friday of every month, and it's open to the public, 7 to 9. I want to make an announcement about a program that's coming up. We have many conferences throughout the year, and one that's coming up is on sexual abuse of children and adults in religious organizations. And it's going to be in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the weekend of November 1st and 2nd. I have a flyer here, and there'll be a couple in the back table. If you're interested at all, you can still apply for this. You can also join ICSA, because the only thing that keeps ICSA going, apart from occasional donations, are the membership fees. So if you can join, that would be very helpful. So tonight's ICSA conversation is building bridges, leaving and recovering from cultic groups and relationships. Tonight's speakers are Joseph Kelly, who is a graduate of Temple University, has been a thought reform consultant since 1988. He spent 14 years in 2 different Eastern meditation groups. He has lectured extensively on cult-related topics and is co-author of the Ethical Standards for Thought Reform Consultants, published in ICSA's Cultic Studies Journal. For many years, Mr. Kelly has also co-facilitated ICSA pre-conference workshops for former members. Also, Patrick Ryan. He is a graduate of Maharishi International University. He has been a cult intervention specialist, meaning ICSA counseling, mediation, resolution, and thought reform consulting since '84. Mr. Ryan is co-founder of TMX, an organization of former members of Transcendental Meditation. He established ICSA's online resource and has presented over 50 programs on many different topics, including thought reform consultation, Eastern groups, working with families, former members, and mental health professionals. He received the AFF, or the American Family Foundation, Achievement Award in 1997 from the American Family Foundation, there it is, and also the Leo J. Ryan Distinguished Service Award from the Leo J. Ryan Foundation. So thank you, everyone. Welcome, please, Pat and Joe.
Thank you all for the warm welcome. Happy to be here tonight. We'll start off with the overview, what we hope to cover. Introduction and overview of a cult model, stages of involvement, why people join, leave groups, and why they stay, what approaches that families use to address their concerns about their loved one involved in a group, intervention, 101 cult mediation approach, when it's not feasible or appropriate to do intervention, assessing each family's unique situation. Ask yourself the value of information. What is a worldview? How do people adopt a worldview? How can families effectively communicate across worldviews? Why are relationships important? What options may be available when family has a good relationship with a loved one? Improving communication and windows of opportunity. When to approach a loved one who has an interest in an abusive relationship or cultic group.
So in our talk, we're going to try to use the word group, and you can follow along here for when we're talking about some things people call cultic relationships, abusive relationships, the whole field. We try to just use the word group. So What we've found in our work and our research is that groups are unique and they're different from time to time and from place to place. So in my view, that if there is a group that has 1,000 members, there's 1,000 different groups, because it's the interaction of a person at a particular stage of their life with a group at a particular stage of its life and its location. It's the interaction of those two things that we look at. So we're not looking at groups as one monolithic bad thing. We're just looking at how one person interacts with those groups.
Groups are plastic and flexible and change from, depending if it's Eastern Europe or Asia, you can have the same group with different rules depending on where that group may exist.
So the group I was involved in, Transcendental Meditation, at the level I was involved, I had spent at the university about, in a 5-year period, about 18 months, 22 hours a day with my eyes closed in month and 3-month-long blocks. So this was quite intense. Although my mother learned Transcendental Meditation and she just practiced it 15 or 20 minutes twice a day. Our experiences were totally different. I was in the group. She was someone who practiced the technique. And so we think that's important that people look at the individual, not necessarily the group, and how the person responds. So in the West, the research indicates about hundreds of thousands of people join groups and leave groups every year. And at least there's some studies that indicate that people stay about 5 to 7 years. Dr. Langoni in his research indicates that about 90% of people who leave groups leave it on their own. It's just a matter of when. It could be at day 2 or 50 years, but most people leave groups on their own. But we also know that at least a sizable minority of people that have been in groups have been harmed in some way, maybe psychologically. Some people not. Some people do very well in a group experience.
There are various stages of involvement when you're looking at evaluating somebody's in a group interest. It starts off with interest. It starts off with somebody's curious about an idea, maybe a person. They've read about a religion that is different from the one they were raised in. Then that moves on to affiliation. How does one affiliate? And that varies depending on the structure of the organization you're looking at. So, for example, I was involved in Transcendental Meditation, and then from there got involved in a group called the International Society of Divine Love, which was a much more demanding group. I was involved in that for 5 years, but the set had been laid for me. I believe that once a disciple is ready, the teacher comes. And as a result of that, when the Swami came into my neighborhood in South Philadelphia and introduced me to the concepts of divine love, it was easy for me to flow from one group into the next. As commitment increases, so do the demands of the group. So as I became more willing to surrender myself to the group's leader and ideology, the demand was greater from the leadership. It required more money, it required more time, and it required an increasing amount of distancing from the things I've been familiar with. At what point does one start to reevaluate one's group involvement? What causes a wavering commitment or affiliation? That can be any number of reasons. It can be when an individual is just tired. They're exhausted from the demands of the group and the ideology, and it just doesn't seem to be fitting anymore. And then, hopefully, you become a former member and move away from your group involvement. And that can be anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 years to 30 years. It just really depends on what those stimuluses are in your life, and if you feel you have a welcoming home or place to come to that's an alternative from your group experience.
So we wanted to also look at why people join groups, why they stay in groups, and why they leave groups, and just throw out some ideas about that. Often families feel that, and maybe former members feel that they were deceptively recruited, some kind of influence was put upon them. And for us, I think that's the last thing that we talk about. I think that people join groups because they're attracted to the leader, its teachings, maybe they stop using drugs or substance, health reasons. People join groups to escape family situations that are not healthy for them. Want to go through some more?
relationships, they find people that they enjoy spending time with. They get to a decision point. They have idealistic goals, dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and this group presents an option for solving those problems. The promise of certainty, the idea that we have the answer to not only the individual's problems, but the entire world's problems.
So the last thing we would mention again is the mind control or influence, because I believe that people affiliate for many different reasons, and we just outlined a few of the reasons. Afterwards, when we're talking, we can play with some other ideas why people affiliate. I also think that joining a group is like falling in love. It's in love with an idea, a person, a concept. We had a discussion one time with a neuroscientist. He thought that it was like falling in love with somebody who adopted a child, that type of love. We're not necessarily, it could be romantic, but we're really just talking about that irrational thing called love. You walk into a bar, you see somebody, you go, oh, and sparks fly, and for some reason you're connected to that person. That's not necessarily something that's rational. So why do people stay in groups?
Why do people stay? They have the promise of a spiritual goal, or they can heal society, which is a big goal. Exclusiveness, that we have special knowledge that we can share with the world, if only you adopt it, embrace it, and take it internally.
This exclusiveness, I think, is a very interesting concept. We have a good friend that was in the group that we were both involved in, and he called his experience being in a prison of specialness. And I think that for me, that really defines what my experience was. I was part of the special elite, but it was a prison. And so initially, I had total freedom from here to here. And as time went on, the freedom just got closer and closer and closer. All the while, my subjective experiences, I had all the choices in the world, but my choices were actually getting more bounded up.
The charisma of the leader. Some groups have a charismatic leader, somebody who we would all agree has charisma. But in most cases, the charisma of the leader is subjective, and it depends upon the needs of the individual when they're evaluating what charisma is. And that's one of the things that Jan Jelalich talks about, is that charisma is not the same for everyone. So when you look at someone, maybe your loved one's group involvement, and you look at them and you think, how could anyone in their rational mind be attracted to such a being? And you're thinking to myself, they have something to offer me. That charisma, that's something special. It's not something that you can and define easily.
I think that we want to talk also about the spiritual experiences or the buzz that happens. And so for different people, that can be something very different. In my experience in the group that I was involved in, we levitated to save the world. And that sounds crazy, but we thought we were doing this practice that was going to have a huge effect upon society. And when I took the course, which was 3 months long, it was the last 2 weeks when we learned this secret technique of how to levitate. And there was a lot of drama about how to learn. And when they taught us the formula, we went to rooms like this room, covered with foam rubber, and we began doing this formula in our head, and nothing happened. And so we began then looking and thinking, why did I do something wrong? Oh, I ate pizza, and they told me not to eat pizza. It was the one night I went to bed 2 minutes after 10. So we began thinking about all these things that kept me from having the experience. But after the third day, I was sitting on one side of the room with my eyes closed, doing a formula in my head, and the next thing I do, I hit the wall on the other side of the room. And my subjective experience, my internal experience, was zooming through the air. Now, if you look at it objectively with a camera, you'd probably say that I was pushing myself off. But I didn't feel that. I felt I was zooming through the air. And that was such a powerful experience that drove the rest of my involvement. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so in my group, the idea was that the guru was the golden avatar. Avatar means a spiritual being who's descended from a divine abode, somewhere above us. And it was thought that in every age, the guru comes back in another form or a different color. So while meditating with the group one summer evening, the room was filled with maybe 50 devotees. The guru was on a dais. The room was hushed. The chanting began low and began to build. And the next thing I knew, with open eyes, the guru was glowing gold. How did this happen with open eyes? It both cemented my relationship with this leader and allowed me to understand the truth of what a golden avatar was. He indeed was that. It didn't matter that 3 weeks before I had seen him slap a woman on her derriere and took me aback because he was supposed to be celibate and divine. That didn't matter. At this point, my inner experience dictated my reality. It became a powerful cocktail between me and the philosophy.
The subjective experience, we believe, is can be very easily transmitted to people. You can give people feelings, internal feelings of love. You can get people to see things, to hear things. It's pretty easy to do that. When you use subjective experience as your yardstick, your measure for what reality is, then the person who gives you that subjective experience, they own you. So that I think that a lot of our work is about the nature of these subjective experiences. So the other reason why people are in groups is because they're doctrines, they like the ideas, they're attracted to them, relationships. They also have fears, phobias of leaving.
We've been told, for example, once you're on the path is a razor's edge. So you're treading this very fine path that only you have been given an opportunity to experience in this age. So to leave that would be to spit at God or to look down on great spiritual knowledge. So the idea of turning your back on something that has been offered to you that's so special is you're considered to be an ingrate. And worse than that, maybe even a demon, depending on how you look at it.
And I think the group we were both involved in, to leave a group was described as selling a diamond for the price of spinach. Throwing away something of such great value when just for your own needs. So people stay also, people who are born and raised in groups stay to have connection to their family. And the relationships that are formed, and the relationships that are formed, I believe, are real. They may be conditional. They may have, the person that you might have a relationship with may feel the same way that you do or not, but they are relationships and they're valuable to people. And then there's a sense of pride or embarrassment that sometimes keeps people in a group. I know in my own experience when I got involved with the group I was involved with, I was 17, and the first thing my parents did was to take me to the priest, and I got the priest involved. And then when they said, well, their friend is a psychologist, so I went to see the psychologist, and I got the psychologist involved. Everybody they talked to, I got them to learn to meditate. So then I convinced my parents to send me to a Hindu university in Iowa and pay a fortune at those times to go to the school.
Which is very impressive to me as an Irish Catholic kid growing up in an inner city neighborhood. That somebody could get their parents to offer to pay to go to a Hindu university in Iowa in the cornfields.
Yeah,
so you were a good salesman.
So when I left the group, I was so embarrassed of what I had done that I didn't tell my parents for 3 years. So my parents would ask, I'd go home, and my mother would say, Pat, we're going to eat at 6:30. It's 4 o'clock. You better go start meditating. So I'd go sit in a room. I'm like, when am I going to have the guts to tell them I'm not involved? Because I had shoved this down their throat for so many years and had done some things that were quite offensive to them. So I think that pride and embarrassment is a part of it. And then there's this mind control and manipulation that people are manipulated into staying. So we keep on putting the mind control, the manipulation at the bottom of the list because we think that there's a lot of other reasons why people stay in groups. And then in terms of leaving?
In terms of leaving, people leave because they're bored. They realize that the claims made for enlightenment doesn't, appear to be a black screen. It shouldn't be a black screen in front of your face. It should be something more lofty. And when you're not gaining any ground and you don't feel like the promises made were the promises received, you then start to maybe reevaluate, give yourself time to think and review, where am I and what were the promises made?
Sometimes your core values, the values we were raised with. If you were born and raised in a group, maybe different, but some of those values kick in. And in my case, I know that sort of honesty kicked in. I remember the day the people from the local center asked me to do an introductory lecture on the university, and I was good at getting people to go there, and that day I said, okay, I'll do it, but I'm going to tell the truth. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, I want to tell them like it really is, not like what we're supposed to say it's like. And they said, no, thank you. And it was that no thank you that was a pivotal thing for me in sort of re-exerting what I had been raised with. It also can be too difficult, because doing this thing can be just too much work. And people get tired of doing the same thing over and over again, or living a life at the whims of somebody else who you trusted has the answer. There's also personality conflicts that occur in groups, with the leader or with membership. You just can become unhappy. And for some people, the shelf of rationalizations collapses. It's like when Dr. Langoni talks about joining groups or affiliating with groups is like changing the sort of fundamental assumption of how the universe works. So if your fundamental assumption from an Irish Catholic family is there's Jesus, there's Mary, there's God, He sends down Jesus, and whatever it is that you're raised with, those are sort of fundamental assumptions of how the universe works. But then you get introduced to a new way of the world works. So you change your fundamental assumption that now no, there's karma and there's multiple lives, and you fill in all the blanks. You do the rationalizations. You fill it in. So at some point, sometimes that shelf just collapses, and you just can't do it anymore.
But the thing that draws you in initially, that idea of relief of anxiety, no longer focused on the demands of the larger society, taking time for yourself to review what is of value in life and what the group pretends to offer. Families become concerned when they realize that these things are really a problem. There's some dramatic change here. What's happened to my loved one? This is not the person that I knew 3, 6, 9 months ago, and it seems that affiliation with this new system of belief is a thing that's different. It's not that there's necessarily, at first many families think it must be drug abuse, or else the individual has no concern about spending time any longer with the family. So normal family time, holidays, conversations are strained. All of these.
And this can also be normal. So someone who's young, who's individuating, becoming themselves, a lot of these same things happen. You separate from your family, you're not necessarily on the same page as your parents with their desires for you to go to a particular university or a particular idea. All of those things can happen also. And it tends to be that people want to put everything in this basket of cult, all of the problems into that. And we think that it's really important to see that there are many reasons why people affiliate with groups. But mostly I think that parents become concerned because they've read something or heard something about a group that they think is scary to them. And so I think that, as we said earlier, if there's 1,000 members of a group, there's 1,000 versions of that group. And in the history that I've been in 35 years of this, there are those groups who have done horrible things. There have been the mass suicides. I've been there. But it's not the norm. It's a very small percentage of it. And so we have to be very careful when we look at groups across the board, because if we might want to tend to put things onto them that don't belong.
And if you're not speaking accurately to your loved one about your concerns, then they're not going to believe you, because it first of all hasn't been their internal experience, the subjective reality that they've experienced in relationship to the group. So you have to know where the individual's at in the group structure and belief system, and what they hope to gain out of it, and how far along the path, or if you have some communication, you'll begin to understand what might be some of the disappointments that they're seeing, some of the things that are troubling to them.
So parents have used, or families have used all kinds of approaches to deal with the situation. And a very common one is just to wait and see if this phase passes. passes. And for many people, it does. And if we look at if that 90% of the people who join affiliate with groups leave, there's a lot of people who go affiliate and de-affiliate very rapidly, some a lot longer. So waiting and seeing is, for some people, a reasonable approach. Others seek clergy or other helping professionals. But mostly it's focusing on ways of getting people to leave the group. And for some families, those are, and I would say for many cases, that's just not feasible or appropriate to try to extract the person from a group. You have to look at it as it is. So very little attention is being paid to the majority of the people and families who these approaches of intervention, mediation, are just not possible. It's expensive, it's time consuming.
It's demanding for both the family and the loved one. All those things considered have to be looked at clearly and with no rose-colored glasses.
So our approach, which we call Intervention 101 or cult mediation approaches, starts with the principle of not doing any harm to the relationship that exists. So whatever the relationship is now, don't do anything that's going to create any more harm to the relationship. Do everything you can to stay connected. And in my worldview, it's at all costs that you stay connected. Because you can't facilitate change generally without having some type of relationship. You can't do an intervention if you wanted to do that without a relationship. You can't sit down and have mediation without a relationship. You can't facilitate change generally unless you have some connection. And we're not talking black and white, but in the main is what we're talking about.
There's no need to punish the member for being involved in the group. You may be at first very angry with their behavior and the changes you see and their involvement in the group. But relationships are more important than the beliefs, and really maintaining the depth of relationship to the extent that you can, instead of setting up every condition for argument, and only arguing instead of communicating becomes a real barrier to having that loved one realize there might be a place for me outside of this belief system.
So what, I think I can speak for myself, Joe may have a different opinion. I don't see myself at this point in my life as a cult fighter. I'm not out there saying this group is right or this group is wrong. So certainly when I was younger and I left my group when I was full of testosterone, I was out there picketing and doing all kinds of things. So, but I don't look at it that way anymore. So I think that working on having people connect is more important than fighting a group. And when you fight a group, or you're angry about the group and you're presenting that information to your loved one, then and you are causing conflict for them, then they have someone to focus all of their energy on, all of their thoughts on. It's you. It's your negativity about the group. They're not left with what the group experiences for themselves, because it's easier to be distracted by what other people say about the group. So if you stop delivering the negative stuff, I'm using that the group might say, and get into a more neutral point of view, then a person in a group can be with themselves, and then they can evaluate, is this person good or not? Just like when you fall in love as a teenager and you don't like the person that your child or your loved one is involved with, you tell them that that's a horrible person, and boy, do they love them. So I think these are important things. So there's a whole list of questions. We're not going to go through them all, but I think it's important to assess the individual situation of every case. And Joe and I spend at least a day with each family to assess the situation, to find out really what's going on as much as we can. And there are a lot of questions, and I've listed here, 20, 30 questions that I want to answer. But one of them is the person in a controversial group? Families have called me and called Joe, and when we've gone and sat down and assessed the situation, the person wasn't in the group. It was, they attended some workshop, and there was some minor affiliation. There was a woman that spoke publicly about her name was Ginger Zukowski, and her mom was part of the Cult Awareness Network. And she actually was kidnapped and deprogrammed at one point because her mother thought she was in a group. And she said, after her mother died, I was never in a group. I just went to do a yoga class, and I had no connection to any of these ideas.
It was some of the post-Jonestown hysteria that had started to develop it within the American psyche about a fear of the unknown. And when they saw someone who was dabbling, and she was merely a dabbler in alternative beliefs, it became essential for the mom, who had heard from her friend that she deprogrammed her daughter, and she had really only taken 1 or 2 yoga sessions.
So
she was hardly a committed member.
So in general, what we want to do is assess it to make sure that we know what the information about the group, that the person is more than a casual member, and then we also want to look at the nature of the family. What is the relationship the person has with their loved one? Is it strong? Is it weak? Are there people that they care? What's the family environment like? Does somebody have a place to come out to? I remember a colleague of ours did an intervention one time, and at the end of the intervention, the guy said, you're totally right. This group sucks. So do I get to come live with you now? And, he said, well, no. I said, why? And he said, because all I have to do is wash dishes in 2 pots, 2 hours a day, and I have a place to sleep, and I get to play music all day long. His needs were fulfilled. So as long as he knew it was all BS, the group, but he was willing to just live through the group, whatever they were asking. I mean, it wasn't that he believed it. It was just very easier. It was easier for him. So you want to look at also the nature of people's psychology. Did they already past history of drug abuse, of psychological issues, their education. So we feel it's important to really look at this assessment phase. And Joe and I always do this with a psychotherapist who's licensed, so that person can give their input on the case.
There's this stress involved in planning an intervention or even contemplating that this action often is too great for a family to suffer through. So the mental health professional helps them settle down and understand the pacing so that they don't misstep and say too much too soon that will offend their loved one, losing any connection that they might have at all.
So we just mentioned a few things about information. Most families or most people go out onto the internet and look for information about groups, and they find information. And any good marketing organization, any good company that has competitors with different ideas knows what the competitor's sales story is, and they provide their customers with information that discredits what their organizations present. And then, to a great extent, that's what happens with groups. You go out on the internet, you find information, and most people have been in some way inoculated with that information. So it's important not just to have the information, but to understand how it's used within the group. And what we don't want to do is provide information to your loved one or the person in a group that sort of cements their conviction that you are a bad person. And so I know that in Joe's experience, I remember in TM, the TM secrets were printed in the newspaper.
And my brother came to me one morning and sat down next to me, and my brother was 4 years older than me. I thought he was a jerk, at that point in my life, but I didn't think he knew anything. I had discovered spirituality. I knew the subtle transformative benefits of it, and he certainly wouldn't have any idea. And he said, Joe, he was really concerned. Here's what I found. And it was a printing of all the mantras and how they were picked for each individual. The mantras were the special spiritual sounds that we were taught had great power and influence. And so when he sat with me, out of his heart, he was trying to be kind to his younger brother, who he thought was being hoodwinked. And all I could say is, you don't understand the nuance. This is a very special secret knowledge, and the guru knows what's best for the individual, and what they printed in here is taking away your ability to really understand that power and that influence.
So in some way, Joe's brother became not recruitable anymore, because he had shown his cards. So there was no reason for Joe to maintain the relationship with his brother. It didn't mean he didn't maintain the relationship, but there was no reason to do it. So we're going to talk about worldviews. We're running a little short of time, so.
Yeah, the worldviews can be adopted through culture, through the family, by religious backgrounds at school, political affiliation, through friends.
So we look at groups as having different worldviews. So we can immediately elicit probably some emotion in people by talking about that Trump guy or the Democratic people. The people who are conservative have an emotional response to one thing, people who are liberal have an emotional response to the other. So we come to these situations with these worldviews, and it's important to understand what worldview is operating when you're trying to communicate with somebody in a group.
Frontal attacks are not likely to be effective. So when you first encounter your loved one's group involvement, if you approach them directly and say, hey, have you read what's on the internet about your group? This is really troubling to me. You're likely to bear no fruit from that encounter.
And I think that it's so, we talked earlier about the importance of understanding the system, understanding it accurately. One thing that we feel strongly is that most families who raise their kids, your kids know what you think about everything. So you don't have to tell them that this is wrong, because you already know what it is. And I know the example that I often use is that when my mother was alive, when the telephone would ring, I could tell by the way that phone rang how that conversation was going to go. Certainly by the sound of the first part of her breath, because I knew her. And so there, in a sense, there was, she didn't ever have to tell me she didn't like it. I already knew it. What I needed her to do, and what she did effectively, was not tell me. And my father was much more effective at not telling me. I knew he didn't like it. He grew up in South Dakota, rode a horse to school every day, became the highest ranking enlisted man in the U.S. Navy. He was just not like his kid, being off in Hindu land, was not what he wanted. But when I would come home and I would either try to convince him to meditate, convince him to do things, he would always say, son, you love to meditate. What I love to do is ride horses. So if I have 10 extra minutes a day, I'm going to ride a horse, because that's what I love to do. And you love meditating. And so he didn't invalidate me. He respected what I was doing. But I also knew that he didn't really want me doing this. And so I think that it's really important that there's these nonverbal clues that we give off, that we don't have to tell people what's wrong with the system.
So the individuals, the families are often worried that enabling this behavior and letting it continue is somehow going to damage them further. So the longer they're involved in the group, the longer they'll be under this undue influence, and the more harm will be done to them. But what we think is that you have to understand the protocols of recruitment and how they work within the group. What are they saying, and how are they trying to draw you into their sphere? And if you violated the protocols of recruitment, it's unlikely that you'll be a worthy subject for them to even address or talk to.
So going on to relationships, why are they important? For us, a good relationship is its own reward, regardless of what the person believes. It enhances the ability to have communication, and communication is necessary to elicit change. So the focus that we have is trying to do everything we can to stay connected. And if you have a good relationship, there's some things can happen. You can live with the glass half full with your loved one in a group. You can maybe bring up some stimulating questions. You can be there for the person when they want to come out, provide a supportive environment. And you can help provide some influence at the times when the person is right. So in our perspective, the group involvement is often like this. People are really happy, not happy, happy, not happy. The windows of happiness and non-happiness open and close all the time. I know that in my 8, 10 years of experience, a stranger could have come up to me and talked to me for 5 minutes and I would have been out. And 2 weeks later, you could have been an army and I wouldn't have budged. All you had to know was what's going on in my head. And the way you know what's going on in my head is that you communicate.
So you look for those windows of opportunity. But the only way you're going to be aware of when those windows are open is if you have relationship. So maintaining relationship at all costs, or if the relationship is broken, develop the relationship anew. Try something that's going to encourage that relationship to be fresh again in the eyes of the group member.
So in terms of improving communication, I think that it's important to acknowledge your own prejudices. Prejudice about religion, prejudice about politics, prejudice about Christianity versus Eastern, whatever thing, we've got to acknowledge the prejudices that come to the equation. Because your loved one knows what you think about those things, and if you pretend that you don't believe that, it doesn't fly. And again, the idea is that we leak like sieves what we feel, and we don't have to tell people. I think that it's important to focus on areas of agreement, things that you can tolerate, and avoid things that you are going to have disagreements about. That helps maintain a relationship. And so there's a couple examples about this that we'll talk about. One is a colleague of ours does interfaith dialogue. He's a monk in the Catholic Church. And he does an interfaith dialogue with Islam, and he does it also with new religious movements. And he asked me, he said, Pat, how do you think I do this? How do you think we have to start? When I'm having interfaith dialogue with Islam, what do you think where we start? And I said, I have no idea. And he said, so we started by saying, Jesus is God, no he's not, yes he is, no he's not, yes he is, no he's not, we go nowhere. So we have to find the area that we have in common agreement. And I said, okay, so where is that? And he said, it's Mary. And I'm going, okay, now how does that work? Why is it Mary? He said, well, when Muhammad and his brother were taking the crosses and the icons out of the churches at that time, as they went around cutting off the crosses, taking down the icons, there was one icon that Muhammad's brother said that one can stay. And it was an icon of Mary holding Jesus. So that's where they start, the thing that they have in common. So identifying those things is important. Another example is art appreciation. There's not much art in this room, but let's pretend this is art. And if I came into your house and said, that really sucks, why do you have that in the middle of your house? Then we already have conflict. But if I looked at this and say, it's really interesting then in this room, why they chose this kind of brick, I kind of like the way this works, but is this a mistake or not? If I can find those things that people like, then I think you have the right to criticize. But if you don't find the things that your loved one loves about this new thing or their beliefs, you can't appreciate what they love about it, it's very hard to dialogue, to dialogue. I think that's it. And we went over a bit.
Thank you, Joe and Pat.